You ever found yourself in a situation and you wondered, how the heck did I get here? Having one of those right now? If that's okay. But I'm sure that this was a question that Jonah had to be asking himself too. Like, how do you get yourself in the belly of a fish? If you look the backside of your bulletin, I like to point this out. We have our statements of faith there. And the very first one says at the top, we believe the scriptures are verbally inspired by God and are without error in the original writings, and that their teaching and authority are absolute, supreme, and final. That comes from 2 Timothy. And again, I like to say that because some of the things that we're going to talk about today, I titled this sermon Unbelievable, so this was certainly one of those stories for sure. I don't recall that Tim or Ron ever preached on Jonah. I mean, maybe I'm wrong here, but I don't remember that. It's a story that I haven't read in a while either. But it's one of these stories that you could just imagine. It's like if you read it to, children, the wonder that they would have. And I was picturing Todd Millen reading to his girls this story. And I can just imagine, like, Annika hearing this and being like, wow, and then Ingrid, being a little older, she might believe it, but she's going to have some questions, isn't she? She's going to, yeah. You might ask Daddy, like, well, what did he eat? And Todd, being the Bible scholar that he is, burgers. Well, how did he breathe? I'll have to ask your mom that one. And then he would proceed to tell Karna that tomorrow night she's doing the bedtime stories. But let's be honest, as an adult, this is a story that really challenges our intellect, doesn't it? It's how's it possible for a man to live in the belly of a fish for 3 days? That word unbelievable can really mean two things. It can mean, wow, that's amazing. How did that happen? But it can also mean, that's ridiculous. I don't believe that happened at all. So it got me thinking about some other stories that are, and there's a lot of them in the Bible that are just, unbelievable. Romans 8:28 says, and we know that in all things God works for the good of those who love him, who have been called according to his purpose. So what does the good of those who love him and his purpose look like? Well, Dr. Mike just read this passage, and in verse 4, it says that the Lord sent a great wind on the sea. And in verse 17 says, now the Lord provided a huge fish to swallow Jonah. Now, I'm not sure if Jonah really felt this way, but that fish swallowing him was exactly what he needed. Because without him, he's a dead man afloat in the sea. So here's a question for you. Have you ever felt that the uncomfortable situations that you sometimes find yourself in is really God providing something that's good for you so that you can fulfill his purpose? Now, I really don't know how Jonah or anybody can stay alive in the belly of a fish for 3 days, but I do know that God gave Jonah what was good for him, the fish, to keep him alive, for his purpose, and that was to bring a message to the people of Nineveh. As an adult, there's parts of this story that I really find hard to believe. I don't know how it's possible that anyone could live in a belly of a fish for 3 days. But there's other parts of this story that I can believe without question. I have no problem believing that Jonah went running in the opposite direction that God gave him. Have you ever found that? Have you ever felt that way? Have you ever done that? I also understand that Jonah not wanting to deliver a hard message to people that he doesn't think deserve God's grace. And I can also understand that my plan and God's plan of how He wants to use me don't always line up. Have you ever felt that way? I'm going to move to another story. This will be familiar to you, I believe. It's from Matthew chapter 14. It says, shortly before dawn, Jesus went out to them, walking on the lake. When the disciples saw him on the lake, they were terrified. It's a ghost, they said. They cried out in fear. But Jesus immediately said to them, take courage, it is I. Don't be afraid. Lord, if it is you, Peter replied, tell me to come to you on the water. Come, he said. Then Peter got down out of the boat, walked on the water, and came toward Jesus. But when he saw the wind, he was afraid. And beginning to sink, he cried out, Lord, save me. Immediately, Jesus reached out his hand and caught him. You of little faith, he said, why did you doubt? And when they climbed into the boat, the wind died down. So here's another miraculous story. Something unbelievable. Peter walking on water. I'm not sure about you, but maybe this one's a little easier to believe. Maybe it's because Jesus is there. He's on the scene. Anyway, it's still amazing. How is it possible that Peter or anyone could walk on water? And why was that necessary? Well, first of all, let's give Peter some credit here. In a very difficult and scary situation, he recognizes Jesus and actually gets out the boat in a storm. He has faith and confidence in Jesus to do this. He's actually doing something that he cannot do on his own power. He's actually walking on water. And then he looks around and he becomes afraid and he begins to sink. I doubt you've ever experienced anything like that. I certainly haven't. But it's another one of these stories that's like, wow, it's unbelievable. However you want to define that. But what I can believe, and this is my own experience, is that I can identify with wanting to know Jesus. I want to understand what he wants from me. I can see how he's worked in me and changed me in big ways since becoming a believer over 20 years ago. I'm doing things now that I never thought I would do in the name of the Lord. And I can also understand taking my eye off of him, falling short, sinking, and crying out for help. Has that ever happened to you? You know, there's so many miraculous stories in the Bible. And I got to believe that there was many more that were never even recorded. We read about how Jesus was followed by huge crowds wherever he went. And that's because he was teaching like no one they had ever heard before. He was healing people in incurable medical cases just by touching them. His following was enormous. Everyone wanted or needed something from him. Or if nothing else, they wanted to at least see these miracles that were being performed. And aren't we the same way? Don't we want to see miracles in our lives? Don't we pray for them? We just pray for healing and, God to touch people's lives, right? We're thankful for the ones that we do see. I was actually hoping at my daughter's wedding, it's going to be 3 years in June. I can't believe that. I was hoping to see the miracle of water to wine at that festival, but that didn't happen. That would have saved me some money, but no. That's okay. That's okay. All right, one more. Another one that should be familiar to you. Now Moses was tending the flock of his father-in-law Jethro, the priest of Midian, and he led the flock to the far side of the wilderness and came to Horeb, the mountain of God. There the angel of God appeared to him in flames of fire from within a bush. Moses saw that the bush was on fire and that it did not burn up. So Moses thought, I will go over and see this strange sight, why the bush does not burn up. When the Lord saw that he had gone over to look, God called to him from within the bush, Moses, Moses. And Moses said, here I am. And then there's some dialogue back and forth between God and Moses and how the Lord is going to deliver the Israelites, but not the way that Moses expects him to. So a little later on it says, so God's saying, now go, I am sending you to Pharaoh to bring my people, the Israelites, out of Egypt. Now the backpedaling begins. But Moses said to God, "Who am I that I should go to Pharaoh and bring the Israelites out of Egypt?" And God said, "I will be with you." And then more dialogue, and then Moses answered, "What if they don't believe me or listen to me and say, 'The Lord did not appear to you'?" Moses said to the Lord, "Pardon your servant, Lord. I have never been eloquent, neither in the past nor since you have spoken to your servant. I am slow of speech and tongue." But Moses said, "Pardon your servant, Lord. Please send someone else." Again, I can't imagine any kind of a supernatural event as this. I've never heard God's audible voice speak to me. Again, it's just an unbelievable story. And yet again, there's parts of this story that I understand completely. I haven't heard God's audible voice speak to me, but I have certainly heard him speak to me. I've heard him ask me to do things that I was not comfortable doing. I've worked up excuses in my mind to show him, to convince him that I was really not qualified to do what he wants me to do. I've also said, "Please send someone else." Have you ever said that? These are just a few of the many unbelievable and amazing stories in the Bible. And when I say unbelievable, what I mean is that I've never experienced anything like this. I haven't lived in the belly of a fish for 3 days. I haven't walked on water. I haven't seen a burning bush that called me by name. I haven't had a donkey or any other kind of an animal speak to me. How about that one? I haven't seen someone rise from the dead. How about the extended day recorded in Joshua 10? On the day of the Lord gave the Amorites over to Israel, Joshua said to the Lord in the presence of Israel, "Sun, stand still over Gibeon, and you, moon, over the valley of Ajalon." So the sun stood still, and the moon stopped, till the nation avenged itself on its enemies. That is as it is written in the book of Jasher. The sun stopped in the middle of the sky and delayed going down about a full day. There has never been a day like it before or since, a day when the Lord listened to a human being. Surely the Lord is fighting for Israel. Then Joshua returned with all Israel to the camp of Gilgal. So what, did the earth just stop rotating for a whole day? Or how about just the opposite, where the plague of darkness fell over Egypt for 3 days? Then the Lord said to Moses, "Stretch out your hand toward the sky, so that the darkness spreads over Egypt, a darkness that can be felt." This isn't a cloudy day, this is darkness. So Moses stretched out his hand toward the sky, and total darkness covered all Egypt for 3 days. So did the earth stop rotating for 3 days? There's so much that I haven't seen or understand. There's so much in the Bible that's really just unbelievable. So if you agree and struggle with the "I don't believe," maybe this will help. It's chapter 38 from the book of Job. The book of Job is a book that we have studied. Tim went through it. And it's when God finally speaks to Job because he doesn't understand what he did to deserve such tragedy that occurred in his life. And it helped me change my perspective on why God does some things that he does. It helped me to leave my lack of understanding with the one who understands everything. It helped me to rest in what I don't know. It helped me to realize that I don't have to know or understand everything. So bear with me as I read this. The Lord speaks. And the Lord spoke to Job out of the storm. He said, "Who is this that obstructs my plans with words without knowledge? Brace yourself like a man. I will question you, and you shall answer me. Where were you when I laid the earth's foundation? Tell me if you understand. Who marked off its dimensions? Surely you know. Who stretched a measuring line across it? On what were its footings set, or who laid its cornerstone, while the morning stars sang together and all the angels shouted for joy? Who shut up the sea behind the doors when it burst forth from the womb? When I made the clouds its garment and wrapped it in thick darkness? When I fixed limits for it and set doors and bars in place? When I said, this far you may come and no farther. Here is where your proud waves halt. Have you ever given orders to the morning or shown the dawn its place, that it might take the earth by the edges and shake the wicked out of it? The earth takes shape like clay under a seal. Its features stand out like those of a garment. The wicked are denied their light, and their upraised arm is broken. Have you journeyed to the springs of the sea or walked in the recess of the deep? Have the gates of death been shown to you? Have you seen the gates of the deepest darkness? Have you comprehended the vast expanse of the earth? Tell me if you know all this. Why is it the way to the abode? What is the way to the abode of light? Where does darkness reside? Can you take them to their places? Do you know the paths of their dwellings? Surely you know, for you are already born. You have lived so many years. Have you entered the storehouse of the snow or seen the storehouses of the hail, which I reserve for times of trouble, for days of war and battle? What is the way to the place where the lightning is dispersed, or the place where the east winds are scattered over the earth? Who cuts a channel for the torrents of rain and a path for the thunderstorm to water a land where no one lives, an uninhabited desert, to satisfy a desolate wasteland and make it sprout with grass? Does the rain have a father? Who fathers the drops of dew? From whose womb comes the ice? Who gives birth to the frost from the heavens, when the waters become hard as stone, when the surface of deep is frozen? Can you bind the chains of Pleiades? Can you loosen Orion's belt? Can you bring forth constellations in their seasons, or lead the bear out with its cubs? Do you know the laws of heavens? Can you set up God's dominion over the earth? Can you raise your voice to the clouds and cover yourself with a flood of water? Do you send the lightning bolts on their way? Do they report to you? Here we are. Who gives the ibis wisdom, or gives the rooster understanding? Who has the wisdom to count the clouds? Who can tip over the jars of the heavens when the dust becomes hard and the clods of earth stick together? Do you hunt prey for the lioness to satisfy the hunger of the lions when they crouch in their dens or lie in wait in a thicket? Who provides food for the raven when its young cry out to God and wander about for lack of food? How do you answer even one of these questions? I could just picture Job like cringing at every verse that's read here. You know, and if that isn't enough, he goes on for another full chapter, asking, it's the same dialogue and the same tone. And this is when me, like Job, I don't have any answer. I don't have an answer for anything that God allows or chooses to do, both for my good and for his glory. So if God decides to keep Jonah alive in the belly of a fish for 3 days, how can I argue that? If he decides to extend or prohibit daylight, how can I argue that? But of all the unbelievable stories that we just read about, and you probably have a lot more, let's just take them for a minute and put them out in the parking lot out there. Because what I really want to talk to you about is the most unbelievable story in all of the Bible. And that one is how God chooses to unfold his plan of salvation. How he chooses to restore his broken creation. He has chosen to use broken people. It started with Jesus parachuting to earth as a man, and then eventually training 11 nobodies, and I mean nobodies, to go out and proclaim the good news. Matthew 28 says, Then the 11 disciples went to Galilee, to the mountain where Jesus had told them to go. When they saw him, they worshipped him, but some doubted. Then Jesus came to them and said, "All authority in heaven and on earth has been given to me. Therefore, go and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Spirit, and teaching them to obey everything I have commanded you. And surely I am with you always to the very end of the age." Amen. You know, you would think that God would have a better plan than this. And yet it continues today with broken people. People like you and me. People who still may be shaky and new in their faith. People who don't have it all together. People who still fail and fall. People who are less than perfect. People who are still under construction. People who don't have a seminary degree or other kinds of religious training. He uses firemen, nurses, corrections officers, doctors, home improvement contractors, bus drivers, dog breeders, music teachers, IT guys, farmers, veterans, retirees, parents, grandparents, great-grandparents, friends, neighbors, town workers, apple pie makers, whatever. He uses them all. And he uses them to show the face of God to a broken world. Yes, to me, this is the most unbelievable story in all the Bible. This one makes absolutely no sense at all. God is going to use the ones who broke the creation in his plan to restore the creation. But you can be sure that this plan is going to work. And it's not going to work because we're really good. Nope, it's going to work because he will be with us. Again, from what I just read, the last sentence says, "And surely I am with you always to the very end of the age." Let's go back to Moses for a second. Did you notice that when God commissioned Moses to speak to Pharaoh, he didn't tell him how qualified he was. He doesn't say, "Well, geez, Moses, you lived there for 40 years. You understand the people. You understand the culture. You actually lived in Pharaoh's palace." No, he didn't say any of that. You know what he says? Exodus 3, verse 12 says, "And God said, I will be with you." That's all he says to him. Believe it or not, as a believer in Jesus Christ, you are part of the most amazing search and rescue mission in the history of the world. Through you, right where you are, God is using you in his plan of salvation. That started in what we can read in the Bible, and it continues today. And maybe that seems unbelievable to you. But this is no joke. These stakes are high. The stakes are eternal life and eternal death. Eternal separation from God. It's serious. I said earlier that I've never heard God's audible voice speak to me, but I have heard him. But there's another voice that I've heard in my life many times, loud and clear. And maybe you have heard it as well. Maybe you have heard the voice of the enemy clearer than you've heard God's voice. A voice that says, "You're nothing. You're a failure. Are you even a real Christian? God can't use you. What difference could you possibly make?" Have you ever heard that voice? But the enemy always tells half-truths. It's true that we have all failed. We all fall short of the glory of God. That's why we needed Jesus to pay for our sins. But because of his resurrection, we have the assurance of eternity in heaven with him. And because of that, we all have a part in this plan of salvation. Again, not because of what we are able to do, but what he is able to do through us. Right where we are, right here in Salem, right where you live, right where you work. And we will be successful because, just like Jonah, he is with us to the end of the age. And again, I think back to that book of Job. Job he really didn't know what was happening. He didn't understand why things were allowed to happen to him because he didn't know of the showdown, essentially, that God was having with the devil beforehand. And you know what? That same thing is happening right now. That dialogue is still happening right now. I can imagine right now that the devil and that God are having a discussion, and they're looking out over all of us right now, and the devil's looking at us and saying to God, "This is your team? This is what you got? These are the people that you're relying on to make a difference in this town and in this community?" And it's not that bad. But I can imagine God saying, "Yeah, this is my team. I love them. Watch what I'm going to do with them." Let's pray.